All right. Looks like Justin's having some technical difficulties. Not sure why.
Yeah, the funny thing with hiccups like this is that the little tidbits about how to deal with word rage do not quite apply because it's the computer, not another human being. Although I'm sure we can discuss having empathy for your computer.
Yep. Well, I guess the one thing that I'm thinking about is, you know, a lot of what the book has taught me personally. You know, so for those who missed the last one, we're talking about nonviolent communication. I think Justin will come back in a second to jump on in. Hopefully we can hear him next time. So this is the second round. Last time the video is already up with a list of the various things we discussed last time. You can check out devempathybook.club for that episode and any future episodes. There's only one past episode so far. And today we'll be continuing that discussion. It looks like Justin's back. Justin, can we hear you?
I don't know. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
we hear you great.
Can.
I'm thinking of those old Verizon commercials now.
Well, I just did the old turn it off and turn it back on again. Apparently rejoining Hangouts was the secret.
Nice.
Okay. Did you give a little intro when I was gone? It sounded like that when I rejoined.
All I said was we're finishing up nonviolent communication today. The old stuff is available online. Again, you can check out our site, devempathybook.club, and see all the stuff that we have there.
That's a perfect intro. I like it. So what I kind of wanted to start us off with for this like part 2 was to see if we had any follow-up thoughts from having done this before. So basically, like, what do we all feel now that we've basically had, you know, a month or so plus having read this book and kind of applying it to our lives, or have our thoughts from the previous episode kind of mellowed in any way?
Yeah, I definitely found that for whatever reason, maybe it was lowered expectations, but I think it was just some of the overly broad, perhaps, statements in the introduction and first chapter, that having some distance from those, I was able to appreciate these chapters a lot more, because they seemed like they were getting less at a worldview that I felt like I needed to align with, and more into the discussions and the discussions that you will have with people, and how to frame your own thinking. And I, for whatever reason, received these chapters a lot better.
Interesting. Yeah, I remember you were somewhat skeptical last time of a certain section of the stuff that was discussed. So that's cool to hear that, you know, that with a little bit of distance from that, it's easier to kind of take it for what it's worth. Look at the, you know, see the positive, see the value, see what it can bring to your life, even if, you know, you don't want to buy into the whole philosophy, which we could spend a whole hour talking about that, the philosophy, you know, the idea of contributing to violence in the world or removing violence from the world. You know, the Marshall Rosenberg wanted to bring world peace, clearly, and he thought this was the way to do it, and he certainly was involved in peacemaking efforts. But you know, you can not buy into his whole philosophy and still find a lot of value in the things he said and things he discovered.
Yeah, and I actually felt like his the things he said about world peace and about peace among societies and truly violent situations were far more compelling in the context of his experience as a negotiator, which we got into a little bit in this section. And so I felt like that really helped me understand where he was coming from. And while I may not agree with the conclusions he came to possibly in his life without a little bit of skepticism. I did find that I really related to his worldview a lot more, knowing what he had experienced and what he saw on a day-to-day basis throughout his life doing his job.
Yeah, from my perspective, it was interesting to see how easy in some situations reading this book can help you kind of see situations differently. However, it also was really apparent how hard it is to kind of keep these things in your mind when you're just doing your day-to-day life. You know, a lot of times having a minor quibble with a coworker or something, I would realize afterwards, oh, that was the time to use the rules. You know, I wasn't, engaging emphatically with everyone. It wasn't empathizing the way I should have. And I think about it, I'm like, okay, so if I was just a little bit more cognizant, it would help. And he mentions that several times in the book, and even more in the second half of like, I'm not saying these are easy things to do. I'm saying that if you do them, you might have these results that I'm having. And it was interesting to kind of start to kind of reconcile that with more or less, trying to live it, so to speak. And it's been interesting also kind of sharing this information with people, talking to other people about the book and seeing if they're interested in reading it, because there's a wide variety of opinions. Some people kind of balk at the idea in general, and other people seem to be like really curious about the concept and are want to dive in. I think that's just people. So it's been fun to kind of be with the book for a little longer. Okay.
One thing I've sort of found interesting in the time following, initially reading the book and continuing to kind of simmer with the ideas, you might laugh at me, but it's true. I've started trying to apply it to Twitter, which is, it's sort of like, starting to, starting rock climbing by going for Everest. It's sort of like the hardest place to try to apply NVC principles because the constraints are so tight. But at the same time, it's really interesting to look at Twitter conversations, like the battles that happen, and sort of like people throw out these like one-liners all the time that get retweeted 24.7 million times, where it's really all about just kind of trying to make a statement or make a point, and and looking at that from an NVC perspective, thinking about where would NVC say to do things differently? Is it possible to apply certain NVC principles? Because a lot of these things take a lot of words to get out. But I've actually found that it's possible in a lot of situations to figure out how to show more empathy, even in a medium as constrained as Twitter. So it's been kind of cool to try those things out, to respond to people who are upset and say, hey, what's the thing that's bothering you? What's making you upset here? What's the emotion? And even if I don't actually go out and respond to the person, in writing, but just thinking about it for myself, if someone came up to me, it's just kind of giving me all these great examples of like someone makes this offhand comment, like how would I respond to it if that was a friend of mine or a coworker?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting exercise, and I think it kind of transitions us into our first topic, talking about how to respond to criticism. I think one of the reactions I had to a lot of this, a lot of the discussion of how you receive criticism, is that a lot of the techniques are based on humanizing the conversation and kind of taking it back from a kind of a precipice of someone is saying something to you and may not even actually have thought through either the consequences or be even invested in having a legitimate conversation with you. And I think Twitter has a lot of those problems, like 500 times added. It's not just someone who, maybe hasn't put as much thought into how they're going to respond to your PR, and instead of giving constructive criticism, like just like off the bat says like, wrong style or something like that. I think, you know, there at least you have that established relationship. On Twitter, you have nothing. And I think it's really interesting to see how some of the techniques about receiving criticism can be brought to humanize really any kind of relationship, to raise the stakes, to make it to the point that you are engaging with another human being and not like 140 characters every few seconds.
Unless it's a tweet bot, but that's an exceptional case.
Fair.
Yeah, I completely agree with both of those.
So did anyone in this portion of the book have reflections on how they might better receive criticism at work?
It's an interesting concept because, you know, when we talk about receiving criticism, right, we're not talking about the people who read NVC and are doing all the rules, right? Because, you know, the point is that through following the rules, you don't put people in a position where they perceive it as an attack, right? It's you're trying to make it as easy as possible for them to receive. But most people haven't read the book, don't have, you know, any really kind of system for how to criticize effectively. So so what that's really about is ultimately saying, you know, other people aren't going to play by the rules. How do you then say, okay, but I'm still, you know, working within the system. What can it do for me to, you know, to help me when someone else isn't working within that system? When I, you know, so again, taking criticism effectively is all about, well, that person said something, but what did they really mean? And if I dissect it in terms of observations and the feelings that those lead to and the needs that are underlying it, you know, it's interesting. It's really interesting, and I've seen people who I don't necessarily know that they've read Nonviolent Communication per se, but doing that same kind of thing. And I think it's actually a cool story to share because the people happen to have been Sandy Metz and Kent Beck. And it wasn't criticism, it was a compliment, but it's ultimately the same idea. So when in 2015, it would have been, I went to my first programming conference in Atlanta, which was RailsConf. And I happened to run into Sandy Metz there. And I said, like, oh, wow, Sandy Metz, like, I'm so happy to meet you. Like, you got me my job. Like, there was this talk that you gave, and like it, you know, I took some ideas from it, and then like I had this coding test, and I did really well on the coding test because of the, you know, stuff that you said in the talk. And I was expecting her to say something like, oh, wow, that, you know, thanks, that's, you know, that's really good. I'm glad that I helped you. And instead, what she said was, oh, that's really great. You know, you took the ideas of the talk and you applied them. Like, you know, really, that's good for you. You know, great job. And I was like taking it back, like, I'm trying to, you know, show appreciation for you, and you're, you know, like what's up with that? So I was kind of like simmering on that. And then the final keynote of the conference was Kent Beck. And when he said what he said, I like immediately, it hit me like what Sandy was doing and what he does as well, which is when someone approaches him with, you know, with a compliment or with criticism, like, you know, your book was amazing, it saved my life, or your book was terrible, it, you know, it destroyed my business. His response was, okay, so I did some part of that, right? Like, let's be honest about, like, I did some part of it. I believe I did my best in writing my book, but ultimately, like, you took the ideas and either you did well with them or you didn't do well with them. And, you know, and so what you're really saying is, I'm really sad because my business crashed, or I'm really happy because, you know, because my business did really well, or because I had some kind of success. And ultimately, it's just about, you know, seeing how much are they really saying about me and how much are they really saying about themselves. And that's exactly, I think, what Sandy was doing, where she was saying that, you know, yes, I gave the talk and I gave my all into that talk, but then it's all about what you did with it. And I think that's exactly what Marshall Rosenberg says to do in that situation, right? It's understand what, you know, what they're really saying. Understand that generally it's not really about you. It's about their unmet needs. It's about the emotions that happen when something that you're connected to doesn't meet their need. And then suddenly you're able to figure out, okay, if it's a criticism, then it's, okay, now I want to, figure out how I can actually meet that need, because that's what's really important here. And if it's a compliment, we say, oh, great, I'm meeting your need. Let's see how I can do that more.
Yeah, I think that's a really lovely story. I think it kind of shows how much the approaches can kind of increase the meaning of any individual interaction and make them more about acknowledge what is in fact going on, as opposed to just kind of allowing things to pass by unacknowledged.
Yeah, I'll add to that and say that it's funny because I wouldn't have, I think, actively thought about applying a set of these rules to when you receive criticism until I got to that chapter, and I was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And from me personally, I'm someone who takes criticism to heart, which normally for my managers means I'm really good at taking criticism. But for me personally, it means it destroys me for the rest of the week after I get it, which is probably not the healthiest thing to do. So it was good to kind of have a context for what I've tried to do over my career, which is take criticism in stride, so to speak. But this reframes it in a way where it's like there's a structure to it. Don't just try to distance yourself from it, but try to say, okay, why are they asking me this? What do they actually want me to do? How can I be proactive with the criticism, even if they don't present it to us in the nonviolent communication format? So I found that kind of refreshing. And as someone who's in a position to mentor people and I end up giving criticism a lot, it's a good reminder for me to know how I'm giving that, making that something that they can capitalize on, even if they haven't read the book. Try to at least meet them somewhere in the middle, which I think was really good. That's good. That kind of makes me want to touch on something else that was in some of the beginning chapters of the second half, which talked a little bit about how we empathize with others. And I believe Amy was interested in this idea of paraphrasing. So I'll kind of let her talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because I often use paraphrasing with more positive relationships or relationships that already have a solid basis. So it was really interesting for me to see some of how it was being used to take relationships that hadn't really been built up. So for me, I struggle with doing a lot of paraphrasing because it really sounds stilted. I mean, I assume that's how it comes off because that's how I feel when I do it. So I'm usually limited to kind of prefacing. I do paraphrasing and saying something along the lines of just asking permission to do it. Okay, that sounds great. Can I repeat back so that I have better comprehension and to make sure that we're on the same page? But that already has to happen in kind of a high trust, well, not super high trust, but a trusting relationship, because you're asking them to just listen to you for no particular reason other than getting on the same page or whatever reason you've cited. So I really liked some of the things he said about how you can use the technique to kind of build trust. I think that the first quote I really liked was making sure that your tone, he says, communicates that we're asking whether we have understood and not claiming that we have understood. And I think that that's a really good way of thinking about how, yeah, maybe it does seem stilted in your head because, you're confident that you understood what this person said. But if you can find a way to not make it as a heavy, intensive thing, where you are asking permission and then you're going to, reflect and then you're going to wait for their response, just doing it kind of naturally is a really good way of building trust, because it makes sure that, if someone does end up without feeling like they're understood, that you have at least never, you know, appeared to think over their thought, that you've always been solicitous of, you know, reflecting what they're saying and making sure that that you're not, you know, just assuming that you understand them. And then the other thing that I really liked was just thinking about how if you do this consistently, you can avoid like a downward spiral. And that if you are in a downward spiral, it's a really good like stopgap. So he tells the story of a manager who would always try to solve people's problems with like a particular set of facts, like, you know, you can't do this because X fact, Y fact, Z fact. And so he says he was talking to the people, to the employees, and they said, when you go into his office, he gives you a bunch of facts, but you never know whether he's heard you first. And when that happens, you start to distrust his facts. So without the, you know, basis of building trust in the communication abilities of the two people, right? Like there's no way to recover if you don't have trust that, you know, what you say is going to be heard. Like even a basic like statement of, you know, we have to do it this way because of X, Y, and Z, which can be completely factual. It's not actually, not just is it not going to have meaning, it's going to have a negative effect on the relationship because people are going to start not trusting that.
Justin, I'm curious if you have any particular experiences that you want to share about that, whether as a teacher, mentor, whether as a boss, cases where I guess either paraphrasing worked really well or where you wish you would have tried paraphrasing.
I could give both, but from a perspective of someone who teaches, so I think I might have mentioned this last time, but I taught at a code school for the last 3 years, and you know, boot camps are very intense, and that meant stress was high, emotions were high, and my job was to be a mentor and to listen to what the students were doing, and often what that kind of meant practically was, in addition to teaching and grading homework, you know, once a week or every other week, I would go on walks with every student. And a lot of the times that was our chance to have a one-on-one. And they would tell me their concerns, their feelings, their stresses. Like sometimes it was life, sometimes it was code. And it would be really easy to kind of just almost fact them, like as in that last story, or just to kind of give them my like, well, I've done this 8 times. Let me tell you how it's done. But I found the most effective way was to just let them talk until they were done. Just keep humming and nodding, and then I would attempt some sort of a paraphrase. I don't think I had a word for it then because that was before I read this book, but this was something very similar to what I would do. Is I'm like, okay, so what you're saying is, or what I hear you're saying is, you know, I would try to repeat back to them how I kind of thought they were experiencing something, and in most cases, it would just be the acknowledgement that I knew where they were at, helped them feel better. It helped them feel understood in some way, even if we didn't come to a solution. I really enjoy that in one part of that same chapter. He talks about trying not to fix every situation because preemptively trying to fix things blocks your ability to, you know, be empathetic in the now. And I definitely could relate to that because every time that I can recall back to when I try to fix something, as soon as someone starts a conversation about a problem, they don't feel good afterwards, even when I know the answer. And this could even just be as simple as code. If someone comes with a code problem and I just give them the answer, they don't feel good in the end. They feel like I just kind of stole that moment from them. So really being present and listening is such a powerful thing.
Yeah, I definitely. Sorry, go ahead, Ariel.
I was just going to say that I mean, I've seen myself do this. Thinking back, I don't know if other people do this too, but when I ask a question, when I myself ask a question, I tend not to just say the like, here is the thing that I don't know. I tend to say like, well, here's the thing I don't know, and here's why I need to know it, and here's what I tried to do and it didn't work out, and here's the things that the pieces that I'm missing. Like, I kind of tell a whole story. And thinking about it objectively, like, that seems a little ridiculous, right? Like, what? Like, all they need to know is the piece of information that I'm missing, and then they can fill it in, right? It's like, why am I jumping to to give the entire story, right? It's because I don't just want. It's exactly Justin's saying, right? I don't just want somebody to fill in that information. I want someone to understand the thing that I'm going through right now, the confusion that I'm having, and then work with me to fill in the last bit. Because I still want to believe that I had some part in resolving my problem. Maybe that's what it is, a feeling of I don't know. Well, I don't want to say a feeling of competence, because competence isn't a feeling according to NVC. So that's my struggle right now. But I want to believe that I'm competent. I want to have my need for independence be met, but I also want to have my need for understanding be met. And paraphrasing's definitely really good for that. The one thing that I think is like really important also to keep in mind is like, human communication is not TCP, it's UDP. I believe UDP is the thing I'm trying to say. Meaning it's not like there's like a, you send a message and then you know that it's been received, character for character, line by line, right? You're like spitting messages out there, and sometimes they make it through, sometimes they don't, sometimes they make it through in the wrong order, right? Like, we've all been in the middle of a conversation and suddenly it's like, oh, that thing that they said like 10 minutes ago, like suddenly I get it. Right. So like, the human conversation is very, very mixed up, and just having that confirmation can be extremely useful, just in knowing that your message has been heard. And I think because we all sort of deeply understand that, it's actually not so scary if somebody's in the middle of a conversation, would say to you, hey, so if I'm understanding you properly, is this what you're getting at? I think most of us wouldn't be surprised by it. We just feel a little bit guilty or uncomfortable being the person to say it. But when we think about it from the other person's perspective, it actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think we should move on, but I often experience the opposite thing, where if someone asks me, so if what you're saying is this, like, then blah, or use the paraphrasing, I actually feel like they're not understanding me as well. Because they need to take the time to do it, as opposed to building on my idea. And so it is like, I acknowledge the value of it and I appreciate it. I'm like, there's a thing in my head like, yes, we are building trust now. Okay, this is good. But it's not like a state that I want to be in for any long period of time, because I want to get to the point where you don't need to do that. And you're just kind of in this flow of having a conversation together. And so it is a really jarring thing that when someone does that, I'm like, wait, but I thought we were getting along fine. Why do you doubt that we're getting along fine right now? I mean, it's not that it's a negative thing, because I acknowledge that it's like, okay, you're taking the time to build that trust, but it also implies that it's not 100% there.
Yeah, there's kind of this built-in acknowledgement of, when you start this up and the other person acknowledges what you're doing, you've basically just entered a mode. You've entered, okay, we're in disagreement, or I'm in misunderstanding with you mode. Let's get to a solution. And if you thought you were on the same page and they didn't, then all of a sudden that can be a interesting thing to kind of mesh well. So one thing Ariel mentioned was, wanting to feel kind of vindicated and kind of feel understood, which I think is such a huge part of this. And that kind of brings me to something that I personally really enjoy and I was really happy to see in the book. And that was the part that was talking about the power in vulnerability and the power in empathy. And I know one quote that Amy had pulled out was the idea of speak our pain nakedly without blame. And this idea that we can embrace our own pain, our own anger, our own vulnerability in a constructive way, not just in a destructive way. I know a common criticism of methodologies like these is they can seem super analytical and like they're above it all, like they're above the idea of human emotion. So kind of diving into that was like a really refreshing idea, because I personally believe like you can't divorce, think, you know, pure logic from like the way people work, because people are emotional. So I think that was a good thing. And what are your thoughts on that, Amy?
Yeah, I think it really ties into something that Ariel wanted to talk about too, about empathizing with our opponents, because I think it sets the stage in the work environment for like talking about why you have the opinions you have, right? Instead of saying something like, you know, I hate this part of the code, saying things like, you know, I am just overwhelmed with how hard it is within this part of the code base to understand what's going on, and I feel like I can't get a handle on it, which makes me feel really insecure, because I never know if what I'm shipping is actually going to cause the bug that brings down production, right? And that's a very different conversation to come at, to introduce the conversation with that is not like, I hate this part of the code base, and unfortunately the person you're talking to is the person who wrote that part of the code base. And I just really loved how the author really acknowledged that, you know, anger and pain are parts of our daily lives, and that by and large, it's just the choice of how we handle them. And at some points, it's just better to share where we're at, because otherwise what's going to come out is something that we don't actually mean. Because what we mean right now is to say, I'm feeling something, as opposed to like, I have this judgment and you need to acknowledge my judgment. When your judgment is really terrible at the moment. It's totally influenced by whatever you're going through at the moment.
Yeah, that's a really, actually, I like that point a lot, right? It's that when when you express things as criticism versus expressing things as you know, your own emotions, right? You are the world authority on your own emotional state, right? No one can tell you what you're feeling. And so when you express an emotion, what you're saying is this is how it is. And that's not something that we're gonna debate right now. Like, people should, you know, people hopefully understand that when I say I'm sad, no, you're not sad. Like, that's not a thing you can say. They might, you know, say things like, you know, you shouldn't be sad because of blah, blah, blah. But people generally won't deny that you are sad right now, right? So you know, when it comes to expressing your own emotional state, expressing vulnerability, yes, it is not always, you know, received as well as we might hope. But at the very least, it's a point to start with, and when it's expressed in the right way, in a way that really focuses on yourself, it's, you know, it's real. What I like to call like real I statements and fake I statements. Like, you know, if I say, like, you know, I feel that you are being mean to me, that's not an I statement. That's a you statement. We just pretend it's an I statement because it starts with I, right? You know, when we have like real I statements, you know, I'm feeling sad. You know, I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling worried. You know, I have concerns about you know, what's going to happen if we go in this direction. I feel worried right now. That makes you partners with the other person. It puts you on the same side, on the same team, even if they're the person who's doing the thing that's causing you trouble right now. And again, there may be limits to this, especially when we get into, you know, real interpersonal stuff. But you know, it starts with trying to connect, and that does put people on the same side. Whereas, you know, when it starts with criticism, right, that's basically set you up in the courtroom. You know, you're the plaintiff, they're the defendant, and, you know, go. People don't often respond well to that. So it doesn't mean that it's always going to work out well when, you know, when you speak your pain without blame. You know, it's often not heard. And I think the book actually mentions that, right? That a lot of the time people will hear what you say, but they won't really hear it, right? They're going to change it into a blame thing, and you're going to have to go through several rounds to really explain, no, I'm not blaming you. I'm not, you know, trying to judge you. I'm saying this is how I feel right now, and that's it. And you know, we're not trained to think that way. So of course no one else is trained to think that way, right? That's, you know, it takes time, you know, to convince people that you're not trying to, you're just trying to express your pain. But if that message does come across, you have a really good chance that people will be willing to work with you rather than fighting you every step of the way.
Yeah, and I think even for your own person, it's just helpful to kind of increase that level of self-awareness to be able to express where you're coming from. Because a lot of our prejudices and assumptions when we come into work about what the right way to do something is or what the wrong way to do something is come from, the scar tissue that we've built up over our careers, and, bad experiences that one organization may not have. And we have all this context, and just acknowledging where you're at, even if it is interpreted, unfortunately, as a criticism of someone else's work, like that at least sets you up to understand where you're coming from and maybe be able to respond more positively when they do interpret it as about them.
I actually have a little anecdote that is possibly relevant, possibly irrelevant, but hopefully on the more relevant side. So I work on a team that mainly does Rails development, but there was a period when I jumped in with another team that was that works in PHP, and aside from the different coding styles, right? It's different communities, different ways of thinking very often. There were very different philosophies in terms of testing, in terms of the size of methods, all kinds of stuff like that. And I wasn't just like reading their code; I actually had to write in their code base. And I was like really super worried, like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna write stuff that looks like Ruby and PHP, and they're gonna kill me. and it was just really interesting to see, how the process actually went much better than I expected. And the reason that it did is because, it wasn't that like anyone was against writing short methods or having a high level of test coverage. It was just that wasn't what they did, but it didn't mean that they that they were like ready to fight me on it. So, if I had come in, if I'd started with like an attack on their code base, like saying, oh, this is like a terrible class, like I'm just going to, refactor it. And this is a terrible thing. And, just started criticizing things like, I don't want to even think about how badly that would have gone. But because I just came in and said, okay, you know what, this is like a new team. They have a different way of working. Like, that's fine. Like, let's just like go in, open mind. And I think because I did that, I was also met with an open mind, and they were actually quite happy to, there was one pull request where the code that my pair and I had written, we submitted a pull request to their repo, and they like the one of the comments was like, this is like a really good example of how we should write all our code. And that happened because we started out basically assuming the best in other people, and just bring our best selves to the table.
Yeah, I think that's really good. Oh, Amy?
I know, I was just gonna say the same thing. I think it's a really interesting thing to see that as I move from different teams and see very different programming styles, I start to see a lot of different influences, whether it's from strongly enterprise, shipped software where you're like mailing out disks, PHP.NET. I start to see patterns about, okay, if you've been in primarily a .NET shop and you're faced with this problem, you are probably going to say that we should go X route, or you're going to be skeptical of this. And I think it's a really interesting thing to see, because it helps confirm or it helps reinforce that kind of approach where you are assuming the best, and valuing someone's experience for what it is, and also trying to engage with them for the things that they are feeling, the fears that they are feeling when they see a particular problem, and they're thinking about these past bad experiences. But that if you go in and you're like, this is the way of the world, it's so off base. It doesn't address anybody's fears or concerns about the future, which is, you know, by definition undefined. There's no facts about the future, right? So we're all basing a lot of our decisions based off of, you know, past experiences that are vastly different.
Yeah, I think we as programmers tend to be really susceptible to this because we all have our own little camps with our own languages and our own frameworks, and the like microcosms get smaller and smaller. You know, I know people that get camped around certain gems for authorization in Rails, and then they'll lobby insults at the other group, and it's so silly, but it can be super toxic depending on the scope and the people in your group. And this was something I had to try to instill into my students when I would teach, because it didn't take long. It took like 2 months of them, you know, learning a language to just all of a sudden start to build up that tribal team mentality. And then the best way to do that is to, you know, be rude to someone else. And it had to tell them, you know, to empathize with those people in that group, which also meant I had to check myself and make sure that I wasn't adding to that. And that's come full circle in that I'm running the Elm user group here in Austin. And I really enjoy Elm as a language. But since it's a new language, it's getting people from all these different communities. So when we get everyone together for a meetup and everyone's talking, in a small way, I'm kind of mediating to make sure we don't have, you know, the people from, you know, X language making fun of the people from Y language, because those people from Y language are there. And even though L might be better at both of those things, it doesn't mean it's a opportunity to dunk on some other language. We're all here. We should be empathetic of where someone's coming from and then help them learn, because a lot of those jokes can come from a sense of ignorance to the other side or the other language or the other, you know, way of doing things. That's good. Ariel, go ahead.
I just want to throw in a recommendation before we move on. It's for a talk that I think both of you saw, because the three of us met at RailsConf 2017 this year, and it was one of the keynotes. So chances are you all saw it. But the keynote by Justin Searles, where he basically described how like different programmer mentalities, like the way that we feel about things, is a driving force behind the various decisions that we make, and a lot of these things just really come down to differences in personalities. And he made up like a, you know, sort of like, it was sort of a joke, but sort of not, like a personality test that which you can go online and take. Like the link was in the talk. I believe he called it the Searles-Briggs personality survey. You know, playing off of Myers-Briggs, and you know, really just thinking about how like all these fights that we have really just boil down to where we're concerned about different things, we care about different things, and if we just kind of acknowledge that, like that there isn't necessarily a right answer, there's just the answer that meets our needs and works best with our feelings, like maybe we can actually find ways to work together more effectively. And to come to joint decisions, even when not all of us are coming from the same place.
Yeah, that was a good talk. I enjoyed that one a lot, and the quiz was fun. I believe I was FALT, so I was fault. I was a faulty programmer. That's what I told everyone after that. So that makes me kind of want to segue a little bit into this idea of applying NVC and the idea of the blameless retrospective. I know this is something that you had put in the notes, Ariel. What exactly did you want to share about that? I know we've kind of touched on it a little bit already, but
yeah. So this is something that I thought a lot about a few months back, where Amazon had like this terrible outage. Basically, like S3 went down in US East 1, and like just a whole chain of things that depend on S3 went down one after the other, and like half the internet was just down, which says a lot about Amazon, also like how much of a monopoly they are. But you know, more to the point, right? So they recovered, they did their postmortem, and they published the results. And this actually is not I looked up that there's multiple times they've done things like this, but essentially they said it comes down to someone basically fat fingered a command in one of their command line tools, and then the important thing that they said was, well, you know, it's not, the problem is not that the person fingered the command. Like, yeah, they left out a parameter in a command line command, but it shouldn't be that there's a situation where someone could like fat finger a command and literally like leave out like, you know, one word or something, and like half of the internet goes down. Like that's a problem in a tool. A tool should never allow destroying the internet. So, so it was really, you know, saying like, let's not think about like just, you know, to have like a witch hunt, find, you know, who's the person that we can blame and like, you know, castigate them in public and, you know, and make them wear the, you know, the fool hat. There are places that do that, by the way. Like if you take, you know, if you break the bill, then like you have to like wear a hat or something, you know, really something very shaming. You know, this is really the opposite approach. It's saying like when something goes wrong, let's look at what happened. Let's figure out how we can change our processes and our tools, and you know, anything else that, you know, about the stuff that we're working with to make it that this kind of thing can't happen again. So that, I think that's a really good example of what's called the blameless retrospective or blameless postmortem, which I think was popularized by Etsy. They might have even invented it, but has spread around a lot. And essentially, you know, that's the idea is anytime something goes wrong, you know, everyone, you know, gets together, you talk about what happened. It's established up front that I mean, I assume there's like an exception if you did something like really malicious, but assuming everyone was making good faith effort, you will not be punished for anything that you did that was a mistake. And that way everyone, you know, can really feel comfortable bringing up the things that they did that led to whatever the incident was happening. So you get really good information out of it because people aren't afraid to speak. And you also correct the problem because, yeah, human error happened. It's going to happen again, but it's, you know, just because you know, you fire the person doesn't mean that they're the only right. They're not the only person who can make an error ever, right? Other people will make that same error, but if you change your processes and your tools and you fix the real underlying causes, that's the thing that's going to work. So that reminded me a lot of certain elements of NVC where, you know, it talks about when there's some kind of negative event, responding in a compassionate way, in an empathetic way. Like it doesn't matter if somebody else is, you know, is the culprit. You know, I can't remember specific examples, but things like, you know, someone cuts you off, you know, in traffic, like instead of looking to blame them, think about, you know, how could I be empathetic to this person right now, right? How can I think about what need they're trying to meet by, you know, driving in front of me? You know, like maybe they're you know, they just don't care about other people, but also maybe, you know, maybe they're in a rush to, you know, to get somewhere because they're late for work, and if they're, you know, late again, then they're going to get fired. Well, now I actually don't feel so bad about the fact that they, you know, wanted to go a little bit faster, right? When we think about the possibilities and the things that are driving other people to do things that you know, that mess us up, especially when it could be that it's not even on purpose, we're much less likely to, you know, to A, react in an uncontrolled, angry way, but and also B, to do things that we're going to regret or are counterproductive.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and I struggle to find some of the right balance there. I think the road rage point is something that's universal and something that I do instinctively. But I think with the Amazon example, I think it's really interesting that you found that to be positive as an example of blameless retrospectives. I remember reading that and just being so pissed that they led with the user's action, as opposed to leading with the fact that this team built a tool. We did not, you know, whatever they want to say about the choices that led to that tool not getting the investment it needed. And then saying, and by the way, like this user did. And I don't know what kinds of legal obligations they're under for writing those things. My understanding is it's, you know, by and large a timeline and then just an expectation of a certain level of detail. But personally, as an engineer, like I would not want my organization to be saying that it was an individual who mistyped a command, as opposed to leading with the tool and then saying, yeah, absolutely, an individual used it wrong. Like, because there was no way of knowing that it was wrong unless you were some sort of savant, or someone who, paid so much attention to the characters that you were probably less productive than your employer wanted you to be on other things. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting balance about how you find that right level of framing something when you are doing something that is very, very public. I think it may be a little bit easier when it's just one person and another, because maybe you can find that level of like, this is the amount of care that we want to take with our conversation, right? But there's always that problem where like someone just wants to get to the point, and someone else wants to take 5 minutes to make sure that we trust each other and we understand our backgrounds. I think it's interesting to try to figure out what the right like level of context and framing is.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a hard problem. I don't think anyone's quite solved it. I do love the idea of the blameless retrospective in practice, and this kind of gets really close to my whole bag with the idea of process reform and how we communicate as a team. And I did a whole three-hour workshop on it at RailsConf, so I won't go into that now. It'll take way too long. But needless to say, I think it is a really helpful thing for a team to be able to know when something goes wrong. We have to have a talk about this, but the process is ultimately the failure, not the person. We have a path for fixing this issue. It reduces some fear and stress from the individuals, which I find to be an overall beneficial thing for the team. But what I really want to kind of get us to talk about now, as we kind of bring this home, is the idea of expressing appreciation. So we talked about like expressing criticism and receiving criticism and a lot of things about communicating when we're not sure. But the final chapter in the book goes over what it's like to actually give effective appreciation and kind of receive it as well. And Ariel, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, this goes back to sort of inspired by my reading NVC and going back to Twitter, because like half of what you see on Twitter, really coming from any opinion, or place, is like what I really like the term virtue signaling. I don't know if it has like political connotations, but the term itself like really shouldn't, right? What it means is that you're saying something not because you think it'll have a desired impact on somebody else, but because you enjoy expressing that opinion. You want to signal to other people who share that virtue with you that you are, you're one of that tribe, right? You hold the same truth that they do. And what that does is it creates echo chambers, right? It creates situations where everyone like only follows people, or friends people on Facebook or whatever other context, right? That who agree with them on everything. And then it's a bunch of people making these very clever comments about how bad the other side is, and again, get lots of retweets and likes by people who agree with them. Like nobody is actually, like, nobody's mind is changed by those comments. They do build a lot of walls. So again, we could go very far into the political element of it. I really want to steer clear of that. I think there's plenty to talk about within the context even of software development, where we have our own sort of like unique, very intense brand of politics around things like languages, frameworks, and communities. So one thing I like to think about is imagine like kind of two ways of leading a conversation, right? So the scenario I'm gonna bring up, because let's kind of make it practical, is you see that your organization is using some tool for who knows what, whether it's a project management tool, it's a JavaScript framework, it's a whatever, and you're like, oh well, I read about this other tool and it looks really cool and I play with it a little bit and it's awesome. So imagine that you walk into the conversation in one of the following two ways. Way number one is well, we're using tool X, it's a terrible tool. Tool Y, like that, tool Y is amazing. It's the best tool ever. It's more flexible, more features, more customization. It costs us half the amount. If cost is relevant, like that's kind of how you walk in. Just like kind of like singing the praises of tool Y and how in every possible way, shape, and form, it's better than tool X. So that's one approach. And the other approach is you started not even like talking about tool Y, but you just ask questions like, well, I see that we use tool X, and we've been struggling with it for a while. Like, I want to understand better, like, what are the problems that tool X is solving for us right now? It tries to solve the problems in a certain way. Is that something that's especially valuable to our organization? What's the real reason that we're so attached to tool X, right? And again, keeping in mind that like you really want to go with tool Y, but if you want to change anybody's mind, right, the second approach is to say, well, let's first understand why people are so attached to tool X before we try to convince them that tool Y is better, because you might think that it's amazing, but it might not be amazing for the reasons that actually matter to them. Or you might just be focusing on the wrong reasons why they should choose tool Y. Like, you're focusing on features, but all you really care about is that the tool's cheap. Stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it actually reminds me of a short anecdote where a friend of mine told me a story where at the company he worked at, a coworker of his was trying to, this was years ago, 2012 or something, or 2013, trying to get the company to use Go as a language. And he was going to do like a lunch and learn topic on like why we all should use Go. And the whole talk was on why Ruby was bad. And then at the very end, he said, Go fixes all of that. And that was the whole talk. And basically the takeaway for the company was no one wanted to touch Go. And they felt very offended that they had to sit through this whole like bait and switch 20-minute, 30-minute conversation about why the language they've been using in selling as a service like isn't valuable. It was a bad positioning on their part to give a talk of that caliber, because it didn't express any intention of why you would switch to this new tool and why you might like the tool you use. Like, and the big takeaway was, we write Ruby because we like the expressiveness and how dynamic it is. We don't really care about the speed. That wasn't an issue. But, that didn't come across. And it's a shame because, my friend, and then by extension, me to some extent, didn't look at Go for a much longer period of time than we probably would have, because every time it got brought up, we go, oh yeah, like that talk, not interested. And that's the exact opposite, effect that he'd wanted in that talk forever ago. So it's really important, I think, to keep in mind, like, how do we express these things? And then when it comes to like appreciation, like, I find this something that I definitely can improve on. I'm someone, when I want to be appreciative to someone or say thanks to them, I tend to just kind of say thank you or say like good job, and or sometimes I'll say I appreciated that, which doesn't really get to the moment. I think it goes back a little bit to the idea of making yourself vulnerable. Like, I have to take a moment, make myself vulnerable, and then express. I now have this framework for expressing appreciation. I am acknowledging that you did X and it made me feel Y, and now Z. And that framework is a nice way of having a template for saying things.
Yeah, I think one thing that has helped me increase the amount of feedback I give is that I focus on finding appreciation that other people say that is not serviced, and that through watching for those moments and then starting to surface those. Like, if someone says something about, like, say we're debugging something and they say like, oh my God, this like Splunk search is the best thing I have ever seen. I think, gosh, who wrote this? All right. And then I confirm with the person, can I share what you just said anonymously as an anonymous quote to this person and their manager? And off goes an email. And that has really helped me find moments where, like, oh, right, I'm having one of these moments. I'm having one of these moments where I'm just so thankful that this person is like putting effort into this thing. And if there was somebody else like hanging out with me, if I had a pair right now, you know, they'd be doing what I just did, you know, transcribing it, quick email. Yeah, well, obviously we can get into the fact that maybe in person is far better, but you know, I think observing it in others is a really good first step to being able to observe it in yourself, and then really using that moment to share it with someone without any expectation. And I think the point of, you know, receiving empathetically and saying, you know, you should receive it with joy is something that I struggle with, and I know that others do. And so I tend to prefer to like just make sure it's as obviously free from any expectation of acknowledgement, and just make sure I'm in a headspace. I usually am, or I don't care if that made you, you know, feel all fuzzy inside. I just like thought you should know. Obviously, if it makes you feel terrible inside, I want to know. But like I'm not asking you to respond and say, "Oh gosh, thank you, Amy." I just want, like, it's just part of a routine of just like sharing observations, and I think that's really helped make those moments more positive.
Yeah, I like that. So I think with that, we're about to wrap up. So what I think we should do now is give any of our closing thoughts, you know, on the book or anything short we haven't really touched on, and then we'll tee it up for next time. So Ariel, you go first and tell us what any closing thoughts you have on the book.
Sure. I'm actually gonna pass on the opportunity to give a closing thought on the book, and instead choose to use the time to put it into practice. Specifically, what Amy was just saying, which is expressing appreciation. So this is something that I like reread now, and like literally like today, and really thought about like how I can apply it. To be much more effective in my appreciation, make people, you know, feel much better about it, and also be much more useful to them, right? Because, you know, the whole NVC process is you acknowledge a behavior. I mean, Justin, you just said it, but I'll just repeat it, right? Acknowledge a behavior, specify how it met your need, and then, you know, talk about how you have positive feelings emerging from that need being met. You know, and that's something that I very often tell people who are, you know, like newer, let's say the conference scene. You know, if you want like a good way to introduce yourself to like a speaker or to someone who's like built a library or a tool that you get a lot out of, right? It's, you know, go up to them and say, hey, you built this tool. It's been really helpful to me in this particular way. Or, you know, this talk that you gave, right? Especially if it's very specific, like you said this thing that actually helps me with a problem I have at work. So that makes me feel really good. It's a really good way to introduce yourself with gratitude. But in this case, I'm not introducing myself to anybody here. I just want to express my gratitude to the two of you. This is hopefully far from the end, but you know, just as a start. You know, I threw my my book club idea up on the slide at the talk that I gave at RailsConf this year. It was really a dream. And I just like desperately hoped I could find some people to, you know, to join me for the ride, and to, you know, help me figure out what on earth I'm doing. So, you know, so I was really nervous, and the fact that you two, like, you know, agreed to join me. In the case of Amy, you actually approached me and said, hey, I'd really love to join your club. That meant so much to me. It made me feel really happy. And you know, and I hope this leads to great things to come. On that note, if anyone out there is listening and interested, we are still recruiting more people. I'd like it to be a larger, more robust discussion. It's really good so far, but I would you know certainly love even more for it to be more people, and more perspectives. So if you're interested, you know, hit DM the Twitter account DevEmpathy. There's also, or you can just like, there's a Google form that you can get a link to from the devempathybook.club homepage. Let us know that you're interested, and we'll be in touch. I'll pass it on to Amy.
Sorry, I just wanted to echo that and say that we're so happy to welcome new members, and that for me, the best part of this has been getting to chat with these two lovely people about how we approach work and how we approach interacting with others, and that's been incredibly rewarding, and we'd love to have you join. My kind of final thought was something we didn't end up talking about too much, but something that I find really personally valuable. The author and I may have somewhat differing instincts when it comes to approaching a lot of the biggest questions about life and our place in the world, but something that I think I really found a deep connection to with him was thinking about what we say about ourselves when we say I have to do something versus something I choose to, and I'd really encourage you to think about what that might be able to do for you, even in the narrow scope of work, like being able to say like, ugh, I have to write this documentation, it's going to make your life so much worse to be thinking that your entire day is going to be spent on something that you have to do, versus thinking about, what, if I'm still writing, like even if I write one word of documentation, I'm choosing to write that one word. Am I going to choose to write the second? Yeah, because I genuinely believe that documentation is going to improve our team. It's going to improve my job. It's going to improve everybody else's, and it's part of having a healthy team and working environment. And I think it's a wonderfully freeing thing to have that empathy for yourself, to say that you should be able to express what you value in your day-to-day life, and that you are doing that for yourself. Like, obviously, if you never want to write documentation ever again, maybe find a job and a team where that's a wonderful thing. So maybe this leads you to think about some career choices. But on the other hand, like, if you can spend more of your life doing the things that you value, that's usually a beautiful thing. And flipping how you think about things from I have to I choose to has been something that's been really valuable to me.
Yeah, I think I'll close this out by echoing what you both said, and to just thank you all for, first of all, like, putting this together, Ariel, for being here, Amy, and having such good thoughts on everything that we've kind of been discussing. It's been really great for me. I will say personally, if it wasn't for this group, I wouldn't have read as much of the book as I had. I am notorious for getting books and reading like one page and then saying, this is probably good, and then not finishing it. So it's been really good to go through it, and I'm very excited about the coming months and the new books we're going to dive into, and getting more people in here and getting more discussions, because I really feel there's always a good value in reading a book like this and kind of expanding your mind that way. But I think there's more value in then immediately reconciling that with people in your immediate circle, because that helps you. It's that kind of grindstone approach where you're, okay, well, this is what the author thinks, but this is what the author thinks and my 3 peers who are in a similar position I'm in. So then you can kind of triangulate a little bit around what's actually going on. And as boring as it might be, my takeaway from the book is it's probably worth keeping around as like a coffee table book to show other people. I don't know many people that when they come to my house, I probably won't mention it to going forward, just as like a conversation starter. And I don't mean like, oh, good, this is great for cocktail hour. I mean, this is something that I think could spur on meaningful conversation with people that could cause them to read it, and I think could help them in some parts in their lives. I see a big benefit in this in helping people personally, not like they are going to go change the world, but they personally will be more in touch with some of their own feelings and be empathetic towards themselves after kind of putting words to these things they might have thought but never really had ways to express. But with that, again, just one final thank you to everyone who's listening, everyone who watched this. Thank you again to Amy and to Ariel. And I think we're gonna leave it there. And please sign up for Dev Empathy Book Club, and we'll see you all next month.
And speaking of next month, I just want to throw in before we conclude, this is the book for next month. It's The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. So I'll just hold that up if you want to write it down. So the central idea of this book really does connect a lot to what we were speaking about with blameless retrospectives, and the idea that the problem is not the human, it's the tool. It's as far as I can tell in my reading of it so far, it really all surrounds that topic, and I think it'll be the spur of a lot of really interesting discussions about how when we build the things that we build in presumably a software context, because it is the Dev Empathy Book Club, how we can make sure that our focus is and continues to be on the people. So looking forward to joining you all for that.
See ya.